Hello, my name's Kerry and welcome back to the Unsolved podcast. As always, before we get going with this week's episode, I'm here to remind you that this is a true crime podcast and not suitable for all audiences. This podcast is aimed at adult audiences only and listener discretion is advised. Before I start on this week's episode, I need to give an additional warning. Today's episode covers the abduction and murder of a child, as well as links with suspected paedophile gangs that committed other crimes against children. Whilst I have not gone into a high level of detail around the crimes committed, extra care must be taken when listening to this episode. It was meant to be a day of celebration. Across the United Kingdom, millions of people were gathered around their televisions, watching history unfold. The wedding of a prince. Streets were lined with flags, homes filled with excitement, and for a moment the country felt united in something joyful, something almost fairy tale-like. But while the world watched a royal wedding, in one part of London, a very different story was beginning. Amid the noise, the crowds, and the distraction of a nation captivated by ceremony, an 8-year-old boy named Vishal Mehrotra disappeared. One moment he was there, the next, he was gone. In a city as vast and busy as London, it's easy to imagine how someone could slip through the cracks, especially on a day when attention was focused elsewhere. But what followed wasn't just a frantic search for a missing child. It became something far darker. Because as the days passed and the truth slowly began to surface, this case would take a deeply disturbing turn, one that hinted at something far more sinister than a random disappearance. Whispers of organised abuse, allegations of a network operating in the shadows, and possible connections to one of the most notorious paedophile rings ever uncovered in London. This wasn't just about one boy. It was about what may have been happening, hidden in plain sight, at a time when no one was really looking. This is the story of Vishal Mehrotra. It was Wednesday, the 29th of July, 1981, a day that many people of a certain age may remember, as over 750 million people from across 74 countries tuned in to watch what would be known as the wedding of the century. Lady Diana Spencer was living the fairy tale lifestyle many a young girl wished for by marrying a prince, Prince Charles. London was at a standstill as streets were cordoned off along the processional route, the royal family arriving in various historic carriages pulled by glistening shiny horses. Queen Elizabeth adorned a blue outfit with matching hat, whilst the Queen's mother followed behind her in a powdered green dress and green feathered hat. The royal men were dressed in their customary military attire, supporting badges that they'd received while serving. Along with the 750 million TV viewers, 17 million of which alone were from America, people also took to the streets, with a reported 2 million people alone lining the route from Clarence House to St Paul's Cathedral, in hopes of getting a glimpse at what would soon be the country's new princess. The prince took the trip first, followed by the royal house cavalry, with his brother sat next to him. The less said about him, the better. The world held their breath as the carriages began to move down the London streets heading towards St Paul's. Lady Diana Spencer was in the glass coach, built in the 1880s and pulled by 2 bay horses, with her father, Earl John Spencer, next to her. The moment then happened. Lady Diana's carriage pulled up to the steps of St Paul's Cathedral, and the world went silent at her presence. Looking shy, timid and beautiful, adorning a £9,000 David Emmanuel dress with a famously long 25-foot hand-embroidered train. And whilst the streets up and down the UK celebrated this royal event, hosting traditional street parties or gathered around the TV in family huddles taking in every moment, for the Mehrotra family, this day wouldn't be about remembering the wedding of the century. It wouldn't be about the social aspect around the streets of Putney, London. It wouldn't even be about spending that time with friends and family. For them, it would be the day that 8-year-old Vishal Mehrotra vanished without a trace. Vishal was born in India on the 27th of September 1972. Along with his family, they emigrated to the UK from Sri Lanka in 1978. Vishal's mother and father had separated, and his mother, Aruna, had returned to India to manage her jewellery business. So Vishal lived with his dad, Vishambar, younger sister, Mamta, and the live-in nanny, Juanita, in Holmbush Road, Putney, South London. As a child, Vishal was described as being bright, with a friendly and open personality. He was always showing himself to be independent, as he would walk himself to and from school. On the day of the wedding, the family, along with the nanny, took the train to London's Fleet Street to watch the royal wedding from Vishambar's office window. Vishambar was a solicitor at the time, although did go on to become a magistrate. The family headed back at around 1:40 p.m, taking the train to East Putney Tube Station. Vishambar had not been feeling 100%, so when they arrived back, he said that he was going to go home. He gave each of the children some money to spend in the sweet shop and left them with Juanita, who took them to the shop for them to pick their sweets. This took around 20 minutes, but whilst in the shop, both Vishal and Mamta complained of having sore throats, so Juanita felt it was a good idea to head to the pharmacy to grab some cough medicine. So the three of them started to head to Putney High Street. Vishal told Juanita that he wanted to go home as he felt tired, due to Vishal walking himself to and from school, and with them not being too far from the family home, Juanita agreed and walked Vishal across the main road at the pedestrian crossing, and left him to continue on the journey himself. Vishal was on Upper Richmond Road, a short walk away from Holmbrook Road. Mamta and Juanita went off to buy the cough medicine and returned home at around 3 p.m. Vishambar was asleep and Vishal was not in the property, leading Juanita to believe that he was outside playing, so her and Mamta took a nap and woke up at around 4:30 p.m. When Juanita realised that Vishal was still not home, she alerted Vishambar and explained what had happened. Vishambar and Juanita made inquiries with the neighbours, knocking door to door and asking if anyone had seen Vishal. But no one had, and at around 7 p.m, they reported him missing to the Metropolitan Police. But for Vishambar, he just knew that something wasn't right. Something in his gut knew that something bad had happened to his son. The initial search by police involved a thermal camera being used in the air, around the common ground areas of Putney and the River Thames. This was carried out from the morning after Vishal's disappearance, and not the night of. There were questions initially as to whether Vishal may have been abducted by his mother, and in fact Vishambar was hoping that this would be the case, as at least it would mean that he was safe. But when Aruna learnt of her son's disappearance and travelled back to the UK, it was apparent that she hadn't. The other consideration was whether he'd been abducted by a racist gang. Police carried out door-to-door inquiries, asking questions of local residents, such as if they had seen anything unusual, if they spotted Vishal on his walk, and had they seen anyone suspicious. But not much came from this. It was 1981, so the technology wasn't as advanced as what we may see today, but the family very much felt like there was more that could have been done. The family were given a point of contact within the Met Police, what would now be called a family liaison officer, who is considered a bit of a celebrity police officer in the UK, Jackie Moulton. The initial investigation into Vishal's disappearance by the Met Police was extensive. This is until 7 months later, when 2 pigeon shooters found a human skeleton in Alder Copse in Rogate. This is on the West Sussex-Hampshire border. with Rogate positioned around 5 miles away from Petersfield. For context, Rogate sits south of London, going through the counties of Surrey and Hampshire, and is around 53 miles or an hour and 15 minutes away from the Mehrotra's home address in Putney. The body was mostly decomposed and had been disturbed by foxes, with his skeletal remains scattered over a large area. Police descended on the finding and sadly confirmed it to be the body of Vishal Mehrotra. Again, with it being 1981, there wasn't much to go on at the scene of Vishal's body being found. DNA was barely a thing then, and with his body in such an advanced state of decomposition, they couldn't even confirm a cause of death. They were only able to confirm the body was that of Vishal's by the use of his dental records. And here is where the police work in Vishal's case becomes hazy. As his body was found in West Sussex, it meant the Met Police had to hand over the entirety of Vishal's case to Sussex Police. This handover taking place in a pub of all places. Vishambar was at work when he got the call to say that they thought they had found his son's body. That's right, no face-to-face meeting, just a phone call. Within my research, I have found a video of Vishambar being interviewed by Thames News about learning of his son's murder. I'm going to play it for you now, and then we'll discuss it.
What's your reaction been to the news that the remains of your son have probably been found by the police?
Well, it came as a shock. I suppose I should have expected it, but I had not heard anything about the find, or which was publicized in the paper, so I had no idea. I suppose at the back of my mind I felt that they might be able to find something, and I thought that there's very little hope. I was just hoping that something might, he might still be alive.
How have you coped with the uncertainty of not knowing what's happened to your son?
That has been very bad. In fact, past few weeks I was getting pretty desperate, and I invited Sergeant Goldie the other day. He was pretty depressed, and I told him how important it was now that something should be found, some clue. But the police were obviously doing everything they could.
Had you been trying to prepare yourself for news like this?
I thought I was prepared, but in spite of everything, I suppose there is some glimmer of hope, or at least it's an irrational kind of hope, as long as you don't know. It was a bad shock, yes.
What were you hoping that had happened to him?
Somehow I knew what had happened, and I said it all along in the past. When he had gone missing, I've told my feelings that obviously somebody has taken him away, which seems to be the case anyway. The police are treating it that way.
How have you broken the news to your daughter?
Well, since the police were not sure that something, they were not 100% sure, I thought I'll wait till they were. So I sent her away to some friends. But then, obviously, the press and the media have taken it up. I told her over the telephone. I'll be seeing her this evening. She's coming back. She seems to have taken it all right, because I have prepared her for it over the period of time. I've tried to speak to her, make her understand that the inevitable is possible, very possible. Well, she seems to have accepted it, but then she's a child. It might take longer for her to understand exactly what it is.
If these indeed are Vishal's remains, what will that mean to your life here?
I can't see how it's going to alter my outlook to my life here. I mean, after all, I live here. It's my home. I've lived here for years. But naturally, it takes time for memories to wear off. I've had him here for about 2.5 years. Both of them been living with me. I suppose I'll just have to face that and let time take memory out.
When I first watched that video, I got incredibly angry. Firstly, there is no compassion whatsoever from the journalist to a man who has endured 7 months of his son being missing and then finding out that he may have been murdered. The main question that made me angry was, what were you hoping had happened to him? I'm sorry, what? Are they seriously asking a bereaved man what he had hoped had happened to his kidnapped son? I only tend to swear on my podcast when quoting, but what the actual fuck? His hope was probably that his son would be returned unharmed. His hope would be that his son is safe to walk a short distance home alone, without the fear of kidnap. I can only praise Vishambar for keeping his cool, because if I was being asked that question in this situation, I would not have remained as cool and calm as him. The other question that made me angry was, if these are Vishal's remains, what will it mean to your life here? Are they asking Vishambar if this situation is going to make him move back to India, a place that he hasn't considered home since he was 10 years old? I just have no words. The timing of when Vishal's body would have been left in Alder Copse coincided with Goodwood Week. For those who don't know, glorious Goodwood is a horse racing ground. Through the year it hosts multiple different horse races, car racing, and also a vintage festival. In July, Glorious Goodwood refers to the flat racing horse event that takes place. People across various corners of the United Kingdom attend, drinking champagne, betting on a horse, and enjoying the south of England's sun. You may be wondering why I'm talking about Goodwood. Well, Goodwood is around 13 miles away from where Vishal's body was found, and on this glorious Goodwood week, the roads would have been very busy. Keep this in mind, as we'll come back to Goodwood shortly. Although the family felt that the police hadn't done much in regards to Vishal's disappearance, they did investigate hundreds of sightings and interviewed over 14,000 people between the time of his disappearance and his body being found. A later witness to the case, who would have reported in to Sussex Police, had been travelling down the A272, a road that goes from London down towards the West Country and passes Alder Copse and Goodwood. Around the time of Vishal going missing, he saw a car that was parked oddly. He described the car as being gold in colour, possibly a Ford Cortina, next to Alder Copse. The car was parked in such an obscure way that this man felt compelled to jot the licence plate number down on a cigarette packet. Although he didn't report the concern to police himself at the time, he kept the cigarette packet for a short while in case he saw anything in the news of a strange occurrence there. After a couple of months, nothing had come about from the area, so the man threw the cigarette packet away. He also saw 2 smartly dressed Asian men carrying bags of fertiliser across the field towards the copse. In later years, this man was hypnotised to see whether they could get him to recall the licence plate number, which he couldn't, but he did recall seeing a woman sat in the back of the car wearing a sari. On Vishal's body being found, the man went to the police to tell them of what he saw, but he just could not remember the car's licence plate number. At the time of Vishal's body potentially being left, there was also a fairground in the opposite field from the copse. There was also a fairground in Putney at the time of the disappearance in celebration of the royal wedding. Again, this will make sense soon. There was another witness who had a very credible story on the day of Vishal's disappearance. The granddaughter of this witness has told of the story that her grandmother told her. She had been to St. Thomas Hospital to visit her daughter on the day of the royal wedding. On her way home from the hospital, she got onto the district line and saw a young Asian boy. Sat sort of on his own, but stood next to him was a man who she described as being Catweasel. Catweasel was a British children's television show that ran from 1969 to 1971. Now, I am not at an age where this would have been on TV for me to watch as a child, but the main character is rather creepy looking, and I'm not sure I would have liked to have watched it. She couldn't confirm that they were definitely together, but she did note that if the Asian boy was not with Catweasel, then Catweasel was certainly taking note of the boy. The next day, she saw a picture of Vishal on TV and called the police, having identified him as being the boy that she saw on the train. She immediately called the police to report her sighting. The police advised that someone would be over shortly to take her statement. Sadly, no one ever turned up to speak to her. A couple of years later, this lady saw a news article regarding the Dirty Dozen, a paedophile ring operating in the London area. And one of the pictures of the members of the Dirty Dozen stuck out to her. That was Catweasel. She was sure of it. This man ended up being Leslie Bailey. And here is where we get one of our theories around Vishal's case. Now, Leslie Bailey isn't a stranger to the police. He was charged and imprisoned for the rape of a young woman in Hackney years before Vishal's disappearance. But in the late 1980s, he would be convicted of the rape and manslaughter of young boys. I know I gave an extra warning at the beginning of this episode, but I want to give you an additional warning here. I'm going to be covering known murders and rapes of young boys. I will not be going into detail. In 1989, Leslie Bailey was convicted of the manslaughter of Jason Swift. In November 1985, Jason Swift was 14 years old when he was abducted and raped by the Dirty Dozen group. His body was found by a dog walker in a copse. There was another victim in 1985, 6-year-old Barry Lewis, who was snatched on the streets in Walworth, South London, on the 15th of September. His body was found 4 days after Jason's body was. And guess what? His body was also found in a copse. In the UK, a copse is a small group of trees or tiny woodland area, much smaller than a forest and often somewhat enclosed or tucked away. Think of it as a little patch of woodland, often found on farmland, at the edges of a field, along country lanes, or in parks and rural areas. Copses can be natural or planted, and they're often dense enough to feel a bit hidden or secluded, even though they might only cover a small area. Because of that, they sometimes come up in British storytelling, especially in crime or mystery contexts, as places that are quiet, out of sight, and rarely disturbed. It was Leslie Bailey who confessed to these murders happening, but he wasn't the ringleader. He was often the man sent to find the boys and dispose of them following the murder. The ringleader was Sidney Cook, also known as Hissing Sid. Previously a fairground worker who resided in London. In the 1970s, the Dirty Dozen was formed, a group of 12 men, with Cook at the helm, who would hire rent boys and abduct young males off the streets. The victims would be drugged with diazepam, raped, and at times murdered. In a newspaper article by The Guardian in 1999, Sidney Cook was described as Britain's most notorious paedophile. By the mid-1980s, the Dirty Dozen group had acquired a flat in Hackney, East London, and according to reports, Cook would tell his group to go and find him a chicken, referring to a young male. While in prison, Cook confessed to inmates of having killed around 15 children. Some prisoners found his confessions so disturbing that they confided to the police what had been said. And this is where Operation Orchard was formed, to further investigate murders that could be linked to Cook and the Dirty Dozen. It was later established that they were responsible for the murder of Mark Tildesley in 1984. On the 25th of May 1984, 7-year-old Mark was on his half-term holidays from school, and like every year, the Frank Ayres Fun Fair was coming to Carnival Field in Wokingham, Berkshire. Mark was desperate to go to the fair, but did not have enough pocket money saved up to go. In an attempt to get some extra money above his 30p pocket money weekly, he went to the local Tesco and returned trolleys in order to get 10p's out of them. On the afternoon of the 1st of June, Mark was excited about going to the fair. When out and about, he met a man outside a sweet shop who gave him 50p to go and buy some sweets. This man also told him that he would pay for him to go on the Dodgems later that night. Mark loved the Dodgems. They were his favourite ride. At 5:30pm, Mark headed excitedly off to the fun fair. Along the way, he met with two friends, who told him that they wanted to go home before heading to the fair later, so Mark continued on alone. He promised his parents that he would be home by 7:30. When he failed to come home by 8pm, his parents began to worry, so headed to the fair to check where he was. They returned home at 10pm, having not seen sight of Mark there, and they reported him missing. Thames Valley Police acted quickly, deploying a helicopter over the fair and surrounding areas and taking witness statements. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a boy being walked from the fair by a stooping man between 7pm and 8pm. Mark's disappearance made national news and featured on Crime Watch, where they received over 400 calls on the first appearance, and then on the first-year anniversary, over 1,000 calls. To this day, Mark's body has never been found, but Leslie Bailey was convicted of his murder in 1999. Although Bailey had told police that Cook had lured Mark away with the promise of a 50p bag of sweets, it is considered that fellow sex offenders aren't the most reliable of witnesses, and due to Cook already serving a prison sentence for the manslaughter of Swift, the CPS decided to charge Bailey with the offence, despite naming in court that Cook and another man, Lenny Smith, were the killers. And this is where our link to fun fairs come in. You may have heard me slip in that Cook previously worked in fairs, giving him the freedom to travel about the UK, but it became a place he knew would be easy to target young boys on their own. Now, we know that a fun fair was in the field opposite to where Vishal was found around the time of his body likely being placed there. But there was also a fun fair in Putney to celebrate the royal wedding at the time of the disappearance. And there is more, because it was later found that Cook had a diary in which he would write his whereabouts, and in this diary, on the 29th of July, 1989, he had one word written down: Goodwood. To get to Goodwood from London, you would take the dual carriageway of the A3, leading on to the B2070, and then on to, that's right, the A272, the road where the witness saw the dodgy car parked up opposite another fairground. To get out of London from his flat in Hackney and towards Goodwood, Cook would have driven past Putney. In fact, he would have driven down the road that Vishal was likely abducted from. It was known that Cook would mostly offend in and around the home counties of England. The home counties are those that surround London, Surrey, Berkshire, Essex, but sometimes counties not directly linked to London but connected to the immediate home counties are considered the more so, such as Hampshire, East Sussex, and West Sussex. Some pretty strong connections then to the Dirty Dozen, and Sidney Cook is currently still in Wakefield Prison, at the ripe old age of 98. Yet it seems that this line of inquiry is not being considered by Sussex Police. There are some areas that we aren't sure of that would help with this link. For example, the bodies of the boys murdered by Cook and his gang all had levels of diazepam in their system. Sadly, due to Vishal's state of decomposition, there was no way for pathologists to test this. But there is another link that, again, police have not looked into enough. A BBC journalist, Colin Campbell, investigated Vishal's case for 3 years and spoke with police from the Met who had been involved in Vishal's disappearance at the time. Around 2018 to 2019, Sussex police were reviewing case files for cold cases. A detective picked up Vishal's case and read through it before deciding not to pursue it any further. In 2019, a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Douglas was being interviewed by police for unrelated crimes, however had previously served in prison around the abuse of boys within a school that he'd worked in called Muntham House School in Horsham, West Sussex. At the time of the previous arrest in the early 90s, police searched his property and they found a document with a one-word title that Douglas had written, the title being Vishal. He had written it in 1983 when he was training to become a social worker. Douglas formed as part of a paedophile ring. He and 2 others were arrested, charged and spent time in prison, with one of the 4, James Russell, fleeing the country. The detective who had previously been looking over the case connected the dots, and Douglas was then questioned by Colin Campbell. When asked why he had a document with the name Vishal on, Douglas responded with, "It's the first name that came to my head, because it had been in the press. It was the first Asian name that I could think of. That's the honest truth." Sussex police did a bit of a, oh okay, yeah, fine, makes sense type of thing, and didn't push any further. But the name Vishal isn't a common Asian name. Apparently, even in India, it isn't hugely common. It is also known that Douglas and Russell had a thing for young Asian boys, and within Colin's investigation, he speaks to Asian men who were abused by him. Colin's investigation forms part of a podcast around Vishal's case, which I will go into more details about shortly. But Douglas also stated that he used Vishal's name as he heard it all over the news. Well, at the time of the essay being written, the news of Vishal had died down. In another twist, Vishal's body was found just 5 miles away from where Douglas's mother lived, and where he would also take these young Asian boys to abuse. When Colin asked about the coincidence of Vishal being found close to his mother's home, Douglas says he didn't know and didn't see it in the news, yet used Vishal's name as it was all over the news. Make that make sense. Vishambar has spent many years pushing Sussex police for a reinvestigation and has constantly been met with pushbacks. Vishambar has been open about saying that Sussex police did not fully investigate his son's case, of which the police deny. In May 2023, a news article from the BBC and Colin Campbell announced that Sussex police were going to re-examine the case following the leads found by Colin in his investigation, this being around the document found in Douglas's possession. And at the time of the re-examination being open, Sussex police apologised to Vishambar for not investigating the connection of the document when it was first found in the 90s. The most recent news on Vishal's case came in October 2023, when as part of the re-examination, they spoke to the man who had seen the car parked up and written down the number plate. He stated, "I certainly believe that had I been able to recall that registration number, that was the key to the whole murder." The car could also be linked to another paedophile that I've named, James Russell, as a victim of his told the BBC that Russell had picked him up from his West London home in 1981 in a gold-coloured Toyota Corolla liftback, a similar-shaped car to the Ford Cortina. James Russell was tracked down in Sri Lanka and returned to the UK. However, he died in October 2023. On this news report, Detective Superintendent Mark Chapman from the Surrey and Sussex Major Crime Team said, and I quote, "We are committed to identifying those responsible for Vishal Mehrotra's tragic death and to delivering justice for Vishal and his family. Extensive and thorough police inquiries have been completed to date, but we remain open to and welcome any new information, and officers will continue to follow up on any reasonable and viable lines of inquiry." Vishambar and the Mehrotra family have never given up hope that one day they will know who killed Vishal. Vishambar went on to remarry and had another son, Sachin, who never got to meet his half-brother. Sachin and Colin Campbell worked together on the 3-year investigation, and later turned it into a 10-part podcast series called Vishal. I have started listening to it, and hearing from Memta, Vishambar and Sachin as to how the unknowing for so long has affected them is just heartbreaking to hear. Vishambar has fought to get answers and even changed his job to learn more about how the law works and where he stands. The podcast came out in 2023 and is still available, so I will link it below. It really gives a lot more insight into the background of Vishal's case and the links with these paedophile rings, and explores how institutional racism could have been the major factor into not finding out who killed Vishal. Racism has no place in my world. Everyone deserves to be treated the same, and this includes those affected by crimes. Vishal was an 8-year-old boy who sadly became the victim of a horrendous crime, and his family have gone 45 years without knowing who was responsible. Sussex police didn't even try to find the rest of his remains. However, Vishal's case does remain open, with new leads being looked into. Hopefully one day, answers will finally be given. This week's episode has been a tough listen. I always find the cases I cover around children really difficult, but their stories deserve to be told too. Thank you as always for listening to the Unsolved podcast. This week's episode was a difficult one. Cases where children are the victim, and particularly when it involves murder and paedophile rings, I struggle with. I have this overwhelming urge to wrap my arms around all the children and try to protect them. Sadly, it's not enough. I will leave links in the show notes for how to report anything that you may know around Vishal's disappearance, as well as links for the NSPCC and other charities who may be able to help if you've been affected by anything discussed in today's podcast. Don't forget that you can follow me on my socials, which are all linked in the show notes below. And this is also going to be another video added to my new YouTube channel at the Unsolved Podcast UK, so do go over and hit that subscribe button. The videos will be released every Wednesday, with the podcast audio version coming out every Monday. If you are in a position to help with the production of this podcast, you can do so through the Buy Me a Coffee link. Again, all the links are in the show notes below. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of the Unsolved podcast. Until next week, goodbye.